Hi everyone, it's Dr. Laura Pence here with the video series Understanding Your Greatest Self. So we're approaching this larger topic of how do I relate to others, and today specifically we're going to dive into boundaries. Now, I'm sure a lot of you out there have heard of boundaries before, right? Healthy boundaries, not healthy boundaries. Today we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit, and this is going to be maybe more of like an educational video than maybe I've had in the past in terms of specifically what does that mean, right? Okay, so the best way, I think the easiest way really to describe boundaries is to understand what's okay and what's not okay. I mean, that's really how simple it actually is. Where it can get a little bit more confusing, though, is that we can have boundaries about different things, right? So we can have emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, time boundaries, sexual boundaries, intellectual boundaries. We can have boundaries about lots of different things, and in those boundaries, we define what's okay for us and what's not okay for us. Now, there are generally three types of boundaries that individuals have. The first one is healthy boundaries, right? And that's when you've established what's okay and what's not okay for you, right? You're somewhat flexible maybe in your thinking about certain things. You're also respectful of your own values and the values of somebody else. You allow certain things to come into your world, but you also fend off other things. That's really sort of the idea of a healthy boundary, is really understanding what's okay and what's not okay and letting that play out in whatever arena you're talking about. So physically, sexually, intellectually, emotionally, okay? Now, after healthy boundaries, we can step into the more unhealthy parts, right? So rigid boundaries are when you're incredibly firm and, yes, rigid with your boundary system, right? So it's a lot of no's, it's a lot of fending off certain things. It's a lot basically of like protecting yourself through really putting up lots of different walls around, you know, those different arenas, right? So emotionally protecting yourself by putting up walls, physically putting up walls, emotionally putting up walls. Those can be ways in which we describe individuals who have rigid boundaries, like really firm, inflexible, like just imagine like a straight line, right? And nothing crosses over that line. That's really a rigid boundary. Then you get to what some people identify as diffuse or fuzzy boundaries. And that's really like when you don't really know, and maybe, you know, you let more people into your world than you really feel comfortable with, but you have a difficult time saying no, right? Or you're really unsure about things, so you just sort of let it play out without really reflecting on your own value system, right? And I mean, fuzzy, I think, is a great word because it sort of describes how it is. It's kind of like you're not really sure and you don't really, you know, have a certain idea or your own sense of where the boundary starts and where it finishes, okay? So again, that's healthy, rigid, and fuzzy. Okay, so what I want you to do, the exercise for the week, is to begin to look at some different categories and identify what boundaries exist in each of those categories for you. So first, let's look at your emotional boundaries, right? So how good are you at setting boundaries around, let's say, for example, your own emotions, right? How good are you at setting boundaries around anger, let's say, and letting anger dictate what happens next? Or how good are you at letting the emotions of other people impact your day? Do you have pretty good boundaries around their emotions impacting you, right? Or do you have really rigid boundaries? And let's say the emotions of other people you don't even recognize, acknowledge, you completely fend off. Or do you have really fuzzy boundaries and other people's emotions impact you significantly and you have a real difficult time distinguishing even your own emotions from somebody else's emotions, right? So in that emotion category, I want you to identify whether your boundaries are healthy, rigid, or fuzzy, right? So the next is physical boundaries. So in that physical arena, in what's okay for you and what's not okay for you in terms of your physical space and, you know, your physicality, where are your boundaries there? Are they healthy? Are they rigid? Or are they fuzzy? And then the last is time. How good are you at setting boundaries with your own time? How good are you at saying yes to some things and no to others? Or are you maybe rigid with your time, right? And have zero flexibility in where maybe you give and take a little bit? Or are you super fuzzy with your time boundaries and say yes to everything and have a really, really difficult time kind of laying down the law and sticking to certain deadlines, right? So that's in the time category again. Are you healthy, rigid, or fuzzy? Okay? So I want you to work through that exercise of the week and just begin to explore that a little bit. Now, if you want to go further and think about sexual boundaries or intellectual boundaries are really about, the value of your own thoughts and the value of somebody else's thoughts and delineating between the two. If you want to go deeper into some other categories of boundaries, that's okay. Absolutely, go for it. So your exercise of the week is to identify whether you have healthy, rigid, or fuzzy boundaries in the following categories: emotional, physical, and time. Okay, join us in our next episode, because in our next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about boundary structures in the family system, right? And how that impacts you today. Okay, so make sure you come back for that episode so you can get that information as well. Hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.